Right now, as I'm talking to you, every Bollywood producer must be fighting for the remake rights of this blockbuster Malayalam film called Romancham. Hello and welcome back to the channel, everyone. Sorry, it's been a very long break. I know there has been a lot on my plate. We'll get to that later. But today we're going to be talking about Romancham, which is a Malayalam horror comedy which was made on a budget of just 1.75 crores, which is much less than what a Bollywood star would get for less than a half day's work. And guess what it made at the box office? More than 70 crores, even after 70 days of its release. Even after it started streaming on Hotstar, it's still running in theaters. But beyond all the box office collections, which we are not going to get anything out of, Romancham is a fresh, relatable, hilarious horror comedy, and if you've already watched it, hopefully you're going to relate to my thoughts here, and if you've not watched it, here's why you should. The setting. Let me ask you a question. As a school or college student, have you spent many days or many nights discussing horror stories with your friends? If you've studied in an Indian school or college, mostly your answer will be yes. And especially if you've lived in Kerala or if you have Malayali friends, they won't just stop with horror stories. They definitely would have told you about this concept called the Ouija board. Sometime back in the early 2000s, during every summer vacations, I used to visit my cousin's place in Kodungalur. It was a small town in Thrissur district, and every time I went, they would introduce me to new movies or new games, new music. But one day, my two cousins took me into a room, asked me to sit down next to them, took a wooden stool, drew alphabets around the edges of the stool, and in the middle area they wrote yes and no. And right in the center, they placed a coin with a candle on top, lit it, and then covered it with a steel tumbler. Obviously, I had no idea what was going on, so I asked them, and they just said, "Today, we are going to talk to a spirit." They just asked me to keep a finger on top of the glass and said that if it moves, it means that the spirit has arrived. I don't know if they were messing with me or something, but after a few minutes, the glass moved. And just like me and a million other Malayalis, back in 2007, there was a real life incident that happened in Bangalore where there were 7 bachelors living in the same house. They played around with a Ouija board, and based on what happened after that, Jithu Madhavan took it and made it into a super funny, uniquely terrifying film about it. I don't know if other states, especially North Indian college students, have ever played this game or not, but even if they haven't, I feel this is a concept that can work in any film industry. Quirky yet relatable characters. During college, especially if you've lived in a hostel, 100% you would have met so many different characters who had so many different personality traits. 2 guys who smoke all the time, 1 guy who drinks all the time, that 1 guy who gets high on half a beer and then pukes all the time. There'll be a guy who doesn't drink at all, 1 guy who always keeps everything clean, and then most guys who don't even know what the word clean means. Romancham takes all of these different quirky characters, and within a few minutes, no matter what their quirk is, whether it's a guy who has a Hans addiction or a guy who drinks cough syrup all the time, they manage to easily connect you with these characters who become your friends in no time. We get to see such characters maybe in a few web series like the shows by TVF, but in our cinema, we're mostly used to seeing these big budget action movies. We hardly get to see good comedies, and what's even more rare is stories about young characters that you may have met sometime in your life. And this is why Romancham is so refreshing. Nothing is overboard, nothing is glamorized. If there's a guy puking on a toilet, they're gonna show it as it is. The way that they've shown this group of characters and the dynamic between these characters feels so real, so casual, so laid back that you'll feel like all of this is happening in your own friends group. And finally, Romancham is a reset button for the horror genre. I don't personally like watching horror movies because everything feels the same. A stupid family buys and enters this house which no one should have bought in their life, and soon they find out that the house is haunted. The kid in the family gets possessed, and they still let the kid sleep in a separate room, and it's all so boring. Everything is a copy of a copy of a copy. Most of Hollywood horror films are just like this, and we just choose to remake all of these movies. But really, in India, there are so many superstitions, so many beliefs in small towns and cities, so many unbelievable stories in our villages, but hardly do we see many interesting films made about these stories. Stree and Bhedia, which are part of the same universe, they are interesting examples of uniquely Indian horror stories, but otherwise, there's no real innovation happening in Indian horror films. This is also why Romancham is interesting, because look at the template. There's a house with a ghost in it. It's the same template, but the fresh concept of the Ouija board, the characters who play with it, and how things escalate so realistically with random strangers coming to play this, queuing up outside the bachelor's house, how there's a guy who actually sets up a chart shop because there's a crowd there. It's an example of a uniquely Indian horror comedy which can be remade in any industry, and it's bound to work provided you retain the factors that made it work, like casting mostly fresh faces. Maybe this story could be a chapter in the 3 universe itself. Or maybe a bunch of boys like the Pyar Ka Panchnama gang gets a hold of a Ouija board and a new story begins from there. The only problem that will come up with a remake like this is when Bollywood producers get greedy and they say, let's make this as big as possible. And then they cast Akshay Kumar in it. If you've already watched Romancham, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you've not watched it, go check it out on Hotstar. Don't forget to check out fullyfilmy.in. But for now, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video.